Billionaire Love Stories. The crystal chandeliers threw dancing shadows across the dining room as Isabella Martinez felt her wineglass tremble in her grip. 40 pairs of eyes had turned toward her, like a firing squad finding its target. 40 forks suspended in midair, 40 conversations dying in a single collective breath. Her husband, Ethan Pierce, the man she'd loved for 4 years, the man she'd surrendered everything to build a life with, stood at the head of the table with a smile that made her blood run cold. It wasn't love in that smile. It was triumph. Isabella, his voice cut through the silence like shattered glass. Why don't you tell everyone what you used to do before we met? Her throat went dry. I worked with children, community programs. The laugh that escaped his throat was sharp and cruel. Community programs. That's such a generous way to describe handing out pamphlets at some little non-profit nobody's ever heard of. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd of investors and board members seated around their table. My wife, Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger as he fed the attention, has this beautiful talent for making poverty sound poetic. She was sweet when I found her, simple, uncomplicated, and back then, that's exactly what I needed. The word simple hung in the air like an accusation, and Isabella felt something inside her chest crack. But as I've evolved, Ethan paused dramatically, scanning the faces of the 40 witnesses he'd so carefully assembled. As this company has evolved, I've come to understand something fundamental. Success demands a partner who matches your ambition, someone who speaks the language of power. He extended his hand toward a woman 3 seats down, Sophia Blackwell, draped in scarlet silk, rising with a smile that said she'd been rehearsing this moment for months. Sophia has agreed to stand beside me, Ethan announced, his chest swelling with pride, not just in business, but in life. The gasps came immediately. Whispers exploded like wildfire across the table. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather folder, walking toward Isabella with measured, deliberate steps. Each footfall echoed like a judge's gavel. I've filed for divorce, he said, placing the papers directly in front of her. Tonight, in front of everyone here, I'm asking you to sign these documents. Let's both move forward into the lives we're actually meant to live. His voice softened, which somehow made it worse. Sign them, Isabella. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Enough money to return to whatever simple life you came from. 40 people watched. 40 people who could have objected, who could have stopped this public execution. Not one of them moved. Isabella looked at the papers, at the man she'd loved, at the woman in scarlet already claiming her throne, at 40 witnesses who'd chosen power over decency. And something inside her that had been silent for 4 years finally woke up. Do you have a pen? Oh my goodness, can you even imagine? Have you ever been destroyed by the person who promised to love you most? Have you ever stood in a room full of people and felt completely invisible? Have you ever hidden your true worth to find real love, only to discover the person you married could never love anything they couldn't control? Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. This is the story of a woman who walked away from a billion-dollar empire to discover if authentic love existed. A woman who found a man who would humiliate her in front of 40 witnesses. A woman who signed divorce papers without reading a single word. And a family who would arrive 24 hours later to remind her husband exactly who he had just discarded. Oh boy, stay with me, because what Ethan Pierce didn't know, what none of those 40 people could have possibly guessed, was that the woman he just publicly destroyed was worth more than anyone in that room combined, and her family was about to make absolutely certain he never forgot it. But to understand the magnitude of what happened that night, we need to go back to the beginning, to the moment when Isabella Martinez made the decision that would change everything. 5 years earlier, the Martinez family estate stretched across 300 acres of Connecticut coastline, private beach access, a staff of 52, gardens that had been photographed for Architectural Digest 6 times, a wine cellar worth more than most people would earn in 3 lifetimes. If America had royalty, the Martinez family would wear the crown. The empire had been built over 4 generations, starting with telegraph infrastructure in the 1890s. Isabella's great-grandfather had owned the lines that carried news across the eastern seaboard. Her grandfather had expanded into radio when everyone said it was just a passing fad. Her father, Rafael Martinez, had purchased struggling television networks in the 80s and transformed them into media powerhouses. By the time Isabella was born, Martinez Media owned broadcast networks, cable channels, digital platforms, and satellite systems reaching 3 billion people across 6 continents. The family wasn't just wealthy, they were infrastructure. They were the pipes through which information flowed. Elena Martinez ran the empire alongside her husband with the precision of a surgeon and the instincts of a general. Silver-haired, even in her late 40s, sharp-eyed, fluent in 6 languages, capable of dismantling a corporate rival before lunch and hosting a state dinner by evening. She had given Rafael 3 children, each groomed from birth to take their place in the kingdom. Diego Martinez, the eldest at 31, ran the broadcast division. He had his father's ruthlessness and his mother's political instincts. Watching him negotiate was like watching a predator play with its food before the kill. Sebastian Martinez, 29, managed the digital platform. Her brothers loved her fiercely and protected her instinctively. Her parents adored her, but worried constantly about how she would survive in the ruthless ecosystem they'd built. And Isabella felt like she was slowly suffocating under the weight of a name she had never asked to carry. The charity gala was held at the estate on a June evening. 200 guests, politicians, business leaders, entertainment executives, old money families whose children had been circling Isabella like sharks since she turned 18. She stood on the terrace overlooking the ocean, watching the party through the French doors, the same faces she'd seen at every event for 23 years, the same conversations about mergers and acquisitions and who was buying what and which senator could be influenced. A young man approached with champagne and a smile that had been practiced in front of mirrors. Gregory Ashford, from a banking family that went back 6 generations. "Isabella, you look absolutely stunning tonight." His eyes did the calculation she'd seen 1,000 times before. He wasn't seeing her. He was seeing the Martinez empire attached to her name. "Thank you, Gregory. I was hoping we could talk about the Hamptons this summer. Mother is hosting at the compound and she specifically asked me to invite you." "That's very kind, but I have plans." "Plans?" He laughed, like the concept was absurd coming from her. "What could possibly be more important than the Ashford summer season?" Isabella looked at this man with his perfect hair and his perfect pedigree and his perfect inability to see her as anything other than a merger opportunity, and something inside her cracked. "Excuse me." She walked away without looking back, leaving Gregory standing on the terrace with his practiced smile faltering. Inside, the party continued. The orchestra played, the champagne flowed, conversations buzzed with the energy of people who believed they mattered because they knew other people who mattered. Ugh, you know that feeling, right? Isabella found her mother in the library, standing by the window with a glass of red wine, watching the party with detached observation. "Running away, darling?" Elena didn't turn around. "Suffocating." Elena nodded slowly, as if this was a conversation she'd been expecting for years. "I remember that feeling." Isabella moved to stand beside her mother. "When did it stop?" "When I found purpose beyond the performance." Elena turned to look at her daughter with those sharp, knowing eyes. "But you're not looking for purpose, are you? You're looking to discover if anyone could love you for yourself." The words hit Isabella like a physical impact. "Yes, that's exactly it." "Then perhaps you should go find out." Isabella stared at her mother. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you've spent your entire life in a cage made of gold and silk and expectations. Perhaps it's time to see what you can build without it." You're telling me to leave? I'm telling you that you have my permission to discover who Isabella is when no one knows her last name. Elena's voice was gentle but absolutely firm. Take 5 years. Change your name. Live anonymously. Find out if real love exists outside these walls. But the family, the business, the expectations. Your brothers can manage the empire. They were born for it. Elena reached out and took her daughter's hand. You were born for something different. I've always known that. I think you have too. Aw, can you imagine hearing that from your mother? And you would just let me go? I built this empire so my children could have choices, not chains. Elena squeezed her daughter's hand. If you ever need me, if you're ever in trouble, if you ever want to come home, I will move heaven and earth to reach you. But until then, you will have the freedom to fail, to struggle, to grow, to love without the weight of 4 generations on your shoulders. What about your father? Your father will argue. He'll say you're being reckless and naive and throwing away your future. Elena smiled slightly. And I will handle him. That's what I do. 3 weeks later, Isabella Martinez stood in a 4th-floor walk-up apartment in Queens, looking at a space that was smaller than her childhood bedroom's closet. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that consisted of a hot plate and a refrigerator that hummed like it was dying, windows that looked out onto a fire escape and a brick wall, no staff, no driver, no family name to open doors. The landlord, a 60-year-old woman named Mrs. Chen, who spoke with a thick accent and squinted at Isabella like she was trying to determine if this girl could actually pay rent, handed her 2 keys. Rent due 1st of every month, no exceptions, no pets, no noise after 10 p.m. You break something, you fix it. I understand. You ever live alone before? No. Mrs. Chen made a sound that might have been sympathy or judgment. Good luck, Isabella Torres. Isabella Torres. The name felt strange in her mouth. She'd practiced saying it, signing it, inhabiting it. But standing in this apartment with 2 keys and 3 suitcases that contained everything she was allowed to bring from her old life, the name felt like a costume she wasn't sure she knew how to wear. Oh, honey. The first week was brutal. Isabella learned that grocery shopping required planning and budgeting and comparing prices. She learned that the subway at rush hour was a physical contact sport. She learned that doing laundry in a shared basement facility meant guarding your clothes like they might be stolen. She learned that the sounds of the city, sirens and shouting and garbage trucks at 5 a.m., were very different from the quiet of a 300-acre estate. She ate ramen for 4 days straight because she didn't know how to cook anything else and couldn't afford to eat out. She cried twice, once in the shower where no one could hear her, once on the fire escape at 2 in the morning when she wondered if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. But she didn't call her mother. She didn't ask to come home. She had asked for this freedom, and freedom, she was learning, came with a cost. What happens next will change Isabella's life forever. The job she takes, the man she meets, and the choice that will lead to that devastating dinner party. Don't go anywhere. Part 2 is coming, and you won't believe what happens when she meets Ethan Pierce for the first time. The job posting had been simple. After-school program coordinator needed. Work with children ages 6 to 14. Provide educational enrichment and emotional support. Modest salary, huge impact. Isabella had applied with her new name, her new background, her new identity as someone with a degree in art education and absolutely no family connections. The interview was conducted by a woman named Sharon Davis, who ran the nonprofit out of a converted community center in the Bronx. Sharon was 45, exhausted, passionate, and deeply suspicious of anyone who wanted to work with underserved kids without understanding what that actually meant. Why do you want this job? Sharon's question was direct, almost aggressive. Because I want to matter. Isabella's answer surprised even herself with its honesty. I want to do something that makes a difference beyond how it looks on paper." Sharon studied her for a long moment. This isn't glamorous work. These kids have trauma, poverty, instability. They will test you. They will hurt you. They will make you question if you're making any difference at all. I understand. Do you? Because you look like someone who's never had to struggle for anything in your life. The words stung precisely because they were true, or had been true until 3 weeks ago. "Maybe that's why I need to be here," Isabella said quietly, "to learn what struggle actually means." Something shifted in Sharon's expression. "You start Monday. Don't be late. These kids don't give second chances to people who waste their time." Oh wow, can you feel that shift? The community center was a 40-minute subway ride from Isabella's apartment. The building had been a warehouse once, converted into a space with uneven floors, flickering lights, and walls covered in peeling paint and children's artwork. 23 kids showed up that first afternoon, ages ranging from 6 to 14, skin tones spanning every shade of brown and beige, languages including English, Spanish, Mandarin, and Arabic, family situations ranging from stable working class to foster care to homelessness. They looked at Isabella like she was an alien who had landed in their world without permission. "This is Miss Torres," Sharon introduced her. "She's going to be running the art program." A girl of about 12, rail-thin, with cornrows and eyes that had seen too much, raised her hand. "Why should we care about art? It ain't gonna get us jobs." The other kids murmured agreement. Isabella knelt down to the girl's eye level. "What's your name?" "Keisha." "Art isn't about jobs, Keisha. Art is about learning to see, learning to express what's inside you when words aren't enough, learning that your perspective matters, that your voice matters, that the way you see the world is worth sharing." Keisha's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "That sounds fake." "Maybe," Isabella smiled, "but try it anyway. Pick up a brush and show me something real." For a moment, Keisha just stared at her. Then, slowly, she reached for the paint supplies Isabella had set out on the table. What she painted, angry reds and desperate blues swirling into shapes that somehow captured chaos and hope at the same time, made Isabella's throat tighten with emotion. "This is extraordinary," Isabella whispered. Keisha shrugged, but there was something in her expression that hadn't been there before, something that looked like pride. "Aw, that's beautiful, isn't it?" Over the following months, Isabella learned more from those 23 kids than she'd learned in 4 years of private school education. They taught her about resilience, about finding joy in the smallest victories, about the difference between pity and respect. A boy named Marcus, 10 years old, told her about his mother who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford their rent. "I'm gonna make money when I grow up," he said with absolute conviction, "so she don't have to work so hard." A girl named Yenia showed her drawings of the home in Honduras she barely remembered, tears streaming down her face as she tried to capture the colors of flowers she hadn't seen in 6 years. A teenager named Dante wrote poetry that was so raw and honest that Isabella had to step outside to compose herself after reading it. These children had nothing, and yet they showed up every day with a hunger to create, to be seen, to matter. And for the first time in Isabella's life, Isabella felt like she was doing something that actually mattered, beyond boardrooms and balance sheets. In her tiny apartment, surrounded by art supplies she bought with her modest salary, Isabella painted more honestly than she'd ever had before. No one was watching, no one was judging, no one was calculating the market value of her work. She painted the faces of her students, the subway at rush hour, the view from her fire escape, the particular loneliness of being anonymous in a city of 8 million people. She painted freedom, and it was beautiful. But the loneliness was harder than she'd expected. There were nights when she missed her mother's wisdom, her brother's terrible jokes, even her father's lectures about responsibility and legacy. You know that ache, don't you? That missing someone so much it physically hurts. There were moments when she wondered if this experiment was worth the isolation. And then she would wake up the next morning and realize that nobody knew who she was. Nobody was trying to use her. Nobody was calculating her value based on her bloodline. That freedom, she decided, was worth any amount of loneliness. She'd been living as Isabella Torres for exactly 2 years and 4 months when she walked into a coffee shop in Brooklyn and changed her life forever. The place was called Groundwork, a small corner shop with mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and a smell of fresh coffee that made the whole space feel like a warm hug. Isabella came here 3 mornings a week before work to sketch in her notebook and drink coffee that was good enough to justify the $4 price tag. She was deep in concentration, sketching the barista as he worked the espresso machine, when a voice interrupted her focus. "That's incredible." Isabella looked up to find a man standing beside her table. Tall, dark-haired, sharp features that photographers would describe as classically handsome. Maybe 30 years old, dressed in a suit that was expensive but slightly rumpled, like he'd thrown it on without caring about the impression it made. "Excuse me? You're drawing." He gestured to her sketchbook. "I've been watching you work for the past 20 minutes, and the focus, the intensity, it's captivating." "You've been watching me for 20 minutes?" Isabella felt a flutter of unease. "That's a little creepy." The man laughed, and the sound was genuinely warm. "You're absolutely right. That sounded creepy. Let me start over." He extended his hand. "I'm Ethan Pierce, and I promise I'm not a stalker. I'm just someone who recognizes real talent when I see it." Oh, honey, if only she knew. Isabella hesitated, then shook his hand. "Isabella Torres. Would you mind if I sat down for a minute? I'll buy you a coffee as an apology for the creepy watching." Every instinct told her to say no. She'd spent 2 years carefully avoiding entanglements that might complicate her anonymous life. Romance meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant potential exposure. But there was something about Ethan Pierce's smile that made her want to say yes. "1 coffee." He sat down across from her and ordered 2 lattes without looking at the menu. His attention never left her face. "So, Isabella Torres, tell me about yourself." "There's not much to tell. I work with kids, I teach art at an after-school program, I live in a tiny apartment with questionable plumbing." Ethan's eyebrows rose. "A starving artist in New York. How perfectly cliché," says the man in the expensive suit who watches strangers in coffee shops. He laughed again. "Touché. Okay, fair point. I run a tech company. Very boring, very corporate, nothing like what you do." "What do I do?" "You create." He gestured to her sketchbook. "You capture something real and translate it onto paper. I just move money around and pretend it matters." "That's a very cynical view of your own work." "I'm a very cynical person. Or I was until about 20 minutes ago." "What changed 20 minutes ago?" "I saw someone who was completely absorbed in what they were doing. No performance, no pretense, just pure focus on something that mattered to them." He paused. "Do you know how rare that is?" Isabella found herself smiling. Instead of connecting, relationships built on what we can do for each other instead of what we feel. That sounds exhausting. It is, but you're different. You're real. You're not trying to be anything other than yourself, and I find that incredibly attractive." Oh, and she believed him. She really believed him. Natasha felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. He seemed so sincere, so different from the Gregory Ashfords of her old world who only saw her last name. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "Then let me learn." What followed was 6 months of the most intense relationship Isabella had ever experienced. Ethan pursued her with a passion that took her breath away. He showed up at the community center with flowers. He attended the kids' art show and praised their work with genuine interest. He spent hours in her tiny apartment watching her paint, asking questions about her process, treating her creativity like something sacred. He shared his own vulnerabilities, the father who'd told him he would never amount to anything, the early failures that had almost broken him, the determination to prove everyone wrong that drove him to work 18-hour days. "I didn't have your advantages, Isabella," he told her one night as they lay together in her narrow bed. "No family money, no safety net. Everything I have, I built from nothing." Oh God, the irony just keeps twisting the knife. The irony was a knife twisting in her chest, but she still didn't tell him the truth. "I'm falling in love with you," Ethan said 4 months after they met. Isabella's heart raced. "I'm falling in love with you too. I want to marry you." The words hung in the air between them like a promise and a question, and a fork in the road that would determine the rest of her life. "Ethan, we've only known each other 4 months. I don't care." He sat up, his eyes intense. "I have never felt this way about anyone. I have never met someone who makes me want to be better, to build something real, to create a life that matters beyond profit margins and investor presentations. Say yes, Isabella. Build a life with me." She should have told him then, should have said, "Before you propose, there's something you need to know about who I really am." Instead, she said yes. They married at City Hall 6 weeks later. Isabella wore a simple white dress she bought at a vintage shop for $75. Ethan wore the one suit he owned that wasn't designed for boardrooms. No guests, no photographers, no family on either side. Just a judge, 2 witnesses pulled from the hallway, and 2 people making promises they both believed they would keep forever. "I love you, Isabella Torres." Ethan's voice was steady as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I love you, Ethan Pierce." And in that moment, surrounded by strangers in a government building, Isabella believed she had found what she'd been searching for. Real love, authentic connection, a man who loved her for her essence, not her inheritance. Oh, sweetie, she had never been happier, or more naive. She had never been happier, or more naive. The first year of marriage will reveal cracks in the foundation. Ethan's company will grow, and Isabella will start to disappear. Part 3 is where everything begins to unravel, and you need to see what happens when success changes the man she married. The first year of marriage was everything Isabella had hoped for. They moved into a modest apartment together, combining their lives and their furniture and their dreams. Money was tight. Ethan's company was growing, but not yet profitable, so they budgeted carefully, cooked at home, found free entertainment in the city. Isabella continued teaching at the community center. Ethan continued building his platform. They supported each other through setbacks and celebrated each other's victories. "I love coming home to you," Ethan would say, wrapping his arms around her after another 16-hour day at the office. "You're the only thing in my life that makes sense." Isabella believed him. She painted constantly during that first year, channeling her happiness onto canvas in colors that seemed to glow from within. Ethan hung every piece on their walls. "My wife is a genius," he would tell anyone who visited. "A real artist, not like the pretentious gallery types. She creates from the soul." Isabella would blush and deflect, but secretly she treasured every word. Here was a man who loved her for her essence. Here was proof that real love existed outside the golden cage of the Martinez name. Oh, honey, just wait. The shift began so gradually that Isabella barely noticed it at first. It started with the investors. Ethan's platform had finally attracted serious venture capital, and suddenly their modest apartment was hosting dinner parties with men in suits worth more than their monthly rent, women with jewelry that caught the light and made Isabella's simple pieces look like costume accessories. Isabella did her best to be a good hostess. She cooked, she smiled, she tried to participate in conversations about market valuations and user acquisition strategies. but she felt increasingly out of place, like she was watching a performance she didn't understand and hadn't been given the script for. The morning after one particularly awkward dinner party, Ethan made his first request. "Maybe don't talk so much about your students next time." His tone was gentle, almost apologetic. "The investors don't really relate to that kind of thing." Isabella looked up from her coffee. "What should I talk about?" "I don't know, just try to fit in more, talk about things they're interested in." It was such a small request, so reasonable on the surface. These were important dinners, she should make an effort. But it was the first time Ethan had ever asked her to be something other than herself. The requests kept coming, each one small and reasonable, and slowly adding up to a larger message. "Maybe don't wear the paint-stained jeans when we have company. Could you do something different with your hair, something more polished? I've hired an image consultant just to help you feel more comfortable at these events." Ugh, can you feel it, the slow eraser? Each adjustment was presented as being for her benefit, to help her feel confident, to make her more comfortable. But the underlying message was clear. The woman Ethan had fallen in love with was no longer good enough. By the end of their second year of marriage, Ethan's company had become a genuine success. The modest apartment became a penthouse with views of the city. The dinner parties became galas. The image consultant became a permanent fixture in Isabella's calendar, scheduling her for spa treatments and shopping trips and etiquette coaching. "You're representing the Pierce brand now," Ethan explained when she protested. "People are watching us. We need to present the right image." "What's wrong with my image?" "Nothing's wrong. I just want to help you feel more confident in these situations." But Isabella didn't feel more confident. She felt like she was disappearing. Ethan started attending events without her, important dinners where she wouldn't fit in, industry parties where her presence might be awkward, charity galas where he needed to focus on networking rather than, and this was his exact word, babysitting his wife. "You don't really enjoy these things anyway. Wouldn't you rather stay home and paint?" She would rather have been by his side, but she'd learned that expressing that preference led to arguments she could never win. "Oh, sweetie, can you feel her shrinking?" Ethan's mother made her opinions clear from the beginning. Patricia Pierce was a woman who'd spent her entire life clawing her way into society's margins and believed that proximity to power was the same thing as having it. The first Sunday dinner at Patricia's home was an exercise in subtle cruelty. "I'm sure you're a lovely girl, but Ethan could have married anyone. There are families who've been positioning their daughters for years, and he chose someone with no background whatsoever." "I love your son, Mrs. Pierce." "Love." Patricia's laugh was dismissive. "Love doesn't run empires, dear. Love doesn't produce heirs with the right connections. I matter more." Oof, that line, that devastating line. And that was the argument Isabella could never win, because saying that her work mattered more than her husband would make her the villain, and Ethan was very skilled at making himself the victim. By their third year of marriage, Isabella had become a ghost in her own life. She moved through the penthouse like a shadow. She smiled at events she was occasionally permitted to attend. She made small talk with people who looked through her like she was transparent. She went to bed alone most nights while Ethan worked late or attended functions where her presence wasn't required. The woman who had once painted with passion and taught with purpose now spent her days in empty rooms, wondering where she had gone. She still painted sometimes, in secret, hiding her canvases in a storage closet Ethan never entered. The paintings were dark now, shadows and silences, the particular loneliness of being invisible to someone who was supposed to see you. One night, Isabella gathered the courage to confront him. "Ethan, we need to talk." He looked up from his phone with obvious irritation. "Can it wait? I have calls to make." "No, it can't wait." Isabella's voice trembled but held. "I feel like I'm disappearing, like you don't see me anymore, like everything about me that you used to love has become something you're embarrassed by." Ethan set down his phone with exaggerated patience. Isabella, I'm building an empire. I'm under enormous pressure. I'm sorry if I haven't been as attentive as you'd like, but I'm doing this for us. Are you? Because it feels like you're doing it for yourself, and I'm just supposed to be grateful for the privilege of watching. That's unfair. Is it? When was the last time you asked about my art? When was the last time you came home and actually talked to me instead of treating me like part of the furniture? When was the last time you made me feel like your wife instead of your liability? Ethan's expression shifted. The patient mask slipped, revealing something colder underneath. I married you when you had nothing. His voice was quiet, controlled, dangerous. I gave you this life, this penthouse, these clothes. Everything you have is because of me. Oh my God, the audacity. I had a life before you. Did you? Because from what I remember, you were teaching in a crumbling building and living in an apartment with questionable plumbing. That's not a life, Isabella. That's survival. Isabella felt like she'd been slapped. That apartment was mine. That job was mine. I chose that life because I wanted to create something real. Real? Ethan's laugh was nothing like the warm sound she'd fallen in love with. Reality is expensive, Isabella. Reality is power and connections and the ability to shape the world. What you had wasn't real. It was a fantasy. I was happy. You were naive. There's a difference. That night, Isabella lay awake staring at the ceiling of a penthouse that didn't feel like home. She thought about calling her mother. One phone call and everything would change. Elena would send cars, lawyers, the full protection of the Martinez name. But that would mean admitting the experiment had failed, that she'd given up her identity to find real love, and instead had found a man who loved a version of her that no longer existed. Pride kept her silent, fear kept her frozen, and the slow erosion of her self-worth continued. 3 months before the dinner that would change everything, Isabella found the first text message. She hadn't meant to snoop. Ethan had left his phone on the bathroom counter while he showered, and it buzzed with an incoming message that appeared on the locked screen. Can't wait for this farce to be over. Soon, my love. S. What? What? Isabella's heart stopped. She stared at the words until the screen went dark, then stared at the blank screen until her vision blurred. S. Sophia. Sophia Blackwell, daughter of the Blackwell Industries CEO, the woman who seemed to appear at every event Ethan attended, the woman whose eyes followed him across rooms, the woman Ethan found all the time to chat with while Isabella stood alone in corners. When Ethan emerged from the shower, Isabella confronted him. Who is S? His face gave nothing away. What are you talking about? The text on your phone. Can't wait for this farce to be over. Who sent that? You went through my phone? It was on the counter. The message popped up. Don't change the subject. Who is S? Ethan wrapped a towel around his waist with deliberate calm. You're being paranoid. Am I? Business contacts don't sign texts with my love. Isabella. His voice turned cold. You need to stop this. This jealousy, this insecurity, it's not attractive. I'm not being jealous. I'm asking a reasonable question. You're accusing me of something based on a text message you misread on a screen you shouldn't have been looking at. That's not reasonable. That's crazy. Oh, hell no. He's gaslighting her. I'm not crazy. Aren't you? Ethan stepped closer, and suddenly his physical presence felt threatening in a way it never had before. You live in a penthouse you didn't pay for. You wear clothes I bought you. You haven't worked in a year, and you're standing here. He walked past her into the bedroom, leaving her standing in the steam from his shower, trembling. She didn't ask again. She should have left that night. Should have, but she didn't. She should have left that night, packed a bag, called her mother, admitted defeat, and started over. But she didn't. She stayed because leaving felt like failure, because she'd invested so much of herself in this marriage that walking away felt like losing everything, because she still believed, stupidly, desperately, that the man she'd married was somewhere inside the cold stranger he'd become. So she stayed, and she smiled, and she pretended everything was fine, until the night of the dinner. The invitation came 3 weeks in advance. Ethan handed it to her over breakfast, his expression unreadable. "You need to attend this one." Isabella looked at the embossed card. An intimate dinner at their penthouse, 40 guests, investors, board members, key partners. "I thought you preferred to attend these things alone." "This one is different." Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "This one, I need you to be seen." Something about his tone made her uneasy, but she nodded, as she'd learned to nod to everything, and began the process of preparing for an event that would destroy her life. The image consultant selected her dress, cream-colored, elegant, unremarkable. The message was clear: be present, don't stand out. Her hair was styled into a sophisticated updo, her makeup applied with professional precision, her jewelry chosen to be tasteful rather than statement-making. When she looked in the mirror the night of the dinner, she barely recognized herself. The artist, who'd once worn paint-stained jeans with pride, had been replaced by a polished mannequin who existed only to complete Ethan Pierce's image. Oh, sweetie, she has no idea what's coming. "You look fine," Ethan said when she emerged from the dressing room. His attention was on his phone. "We need to be ready in 10 minutes. Fine. Not beautiful, not stunning, not even good, just fine. And that brings us back to where we started. The dinner, the 40 witnesses, the public humiliation. But what happens next? How does Isabella's family respond? And what does Ethan lose when he discovers who he just destroyed? Part 4 will show you the moment everything changes, and it's more satisfying than you can imagine. The guests began arriving at 7. Isabella greeted them with the smile she'd perfected over 3 years. Investors whose names she'd memorized, board members whose egos she'd learned to manage, society figures who looked at her like she was a curiosity they couldn't quite understand. And Sophia Blackwell, arriving in a crimson dress that looked like it had been designed for this specific moment. "Isabella, how lovely to see you." Sophia's smile was pure poison. "You look, well, comfortable." "Thank you, Sophia." The dinner table was set for 40, crystal and china that had been selected by someone other than Isabella, floral arrangements that filled the room with a scent that was too sweet, almost cloying. Isabella was seated at one end of the table, Ethan at the other, like opposing forces that were no longer meant to connect. The first course was served, conversations flowed around her, business deals, market trends, the kind of talk that Isabella had been trained to smile through without contributing. She caught Ethan's eye once across the table. He looked right through her. That was when she knew something terrible was coming. Oh God, here it comes. The main course was cleared, champagne was poured, and Ethan stood, tapping his glass with a knife to command attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" The room fell silent. 40 faces turned toward him with the expectant attention people give to someone they believe controls their futures. Tonight we celebrate not just the success of Pierce Technologies, but the beginning of an exciting new chapter. Polite applause rippled through the room. "As many of you know, I've always believed in evolution." Ethan's voice was smooth, practiced, in shedding what no longer serves us to embrace what elevates us. Isabella felt her pulse quicken. Something in his tone sent alarm signals racing through her nervous system. "Which is why I have an important announcement to make." And then he asked the question that would shatter her world. "Isabella, why don't you tell everyone what you did before we met?" 40 pairs of eyes turned toward her like synchronized dancers following choreography they'd practiced. Isabella's champagne glass trembled in her hand. She looked at her husband and saw triumph in his smile. "I worked in community outreach." Cameron's laugh cut through the silence like shattering crystal, and the performance began. You know what happened next. The cruel jokes, the public dismissal, the mistress in crimson, the divorce papers placed in front of her like an ultimatum, 40 witnesses who chose power over decency. and Isabella signing those papers with a dignity that should have warned Ethan exactly what storm was coming. Yes, sign them, honey, sign them and walk away. Do you have a pen? She didn't read a single word. She didn't negotiate, she didn't beg or cry or make a scene. She simply signed her name on every flagged line. Her handwriting was steady, clear, final. When she finished, she closed the folder and handed it back to Ethan. Then she stood, smoothed her cream-colored dress, and looked her husband in the eyes. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Ethan." Her voice was quiet but absolutely steady. "I genuinely hope you do." She turned and walked toward the door. The crowd parted before her like water. The whispers followed her. 40 pairs of eyes burned into her back. She'd almost reached the elevator when she heard Ethan's voice behind her. "Ladies and gentlemen, a toast to new beginnings." The sound of clinking glasses followed her into the hallway. Isabella stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors closed, and only then, in the privacy of that small descending box, did she allow herself to breathe. Breathe, honey, just breathe. Her hands were shaking, her heart was racing, but underneath the shock and humiliation, something else was rising. Rage. Clean, clarifying, righteous rage. The elevator reached the lobby, the doors opened, and Isabella stepped out into the marble-floored entrance of the building where she lived for 2 years and suddenly felt like a stranger. The night air hit her face as she pushed through the glass doors onto the street, cold, sharp, real. She stood on the sidewalk, her designer dress and professional hair and perfect makeup completely at odds with the fact that she'd just been 4 years of hiding who she was. 4 years of trying to be loved for herself. 4 years of marriage to a man who'd systematically erased her until nothing remained. And it had all ended in a performance designed to humiliate her in front of 40 witnesses. Isabella pulled her phone from her small clutch purse. Her hands were still shaking as she scrolled through contacts she hadn't accessed in 4 years. She found the name, stared at it, felt 4 years of stubborn pride warring with the desperate need to go home. The need won. She pressed the call button. The phone rang once. "Isabella?" Her mother's voice was immediate, alert, as if she'd been waiting by the phone for exactly this call. "Mom?" The word came out broken. "I need to come home. We're already on our way." Yes! Oh my God, finally! 45 minutes earlier, in a study in the Connecticut estate, Elena Martinez had been sitting at her desk reviewing quarterly reports when her phone buzzed with an alert. She picked it up and saw a notification from Marcus Reeves, the private investigator she'd kept on retainer for the past 4 years. The man whose sole job had been to watch her daughter from a distance and report anything concerning. The message was brief. "You need to see this. Now." Elena opened the attached video file. The feed was from a discreet camera that Marcus had positioned with a view into Ethan Pierce's penthouse. Elena had approved the surveillance 2 years ago, when her investigator had first reported concerns about how Isabella's husband was treating her. What she saw made her blood turn to ice. Her daughter sitting at a table surrounded by 40 people, being systematically humiliated by the man who'd promised to love her. Oh, Elena is furious. You can feel it, can't you? Elena watched Ethan's performance, the cruel jokes, the public dismissal, the mistress in the crimson dress, the divorce papers placed in front of her daughter like an ultimatum. She watched Isabella sign them with a dignity that made Elena's heart break and swell with pride simultaneously. And then she made 3 phone calls. The first was to her sons. "Diego, Sebastian, I need you both at the estate in 20 minutes. We're bringing your sister home." The second was to her head of security. "Prepare 7 vehicles, full security detail, legal team. We're going into Manhattan tonight." The third was to Marcus Reeves. "Send me the address. We'll be there within the hour." Diego and Sebastian arrived at the estate within 15 minutes. Both had been at their own homes. Both had dropped everything the moment their mother called. What happened? Diego's voice was tight with controlled fury. Elena showed them the video. Sebastian's face went white. "I'm going to kill him." "No." Elena's voice was absolute. "You're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. We're going to collect your sister, we're going to protect her, and we're going to remind Ethan Pierce exactly who he just destroyed." She looked at both her sons. "Are we clear?" They nodded. Oh, this is going to be good." The convoy assembled in the circular drive of the estate, 7 black SUVs, armored and bulletproof, a security team that had been trained by former Secret Service agents, a legal team led by Margaret Richardson, the most feared divorce attorney on the eastern seaboard, and the Martinez family, mobilizing like an army going to war. Elena sat in the lead vehicle, her phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated logistics. Diego sat beside her, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jumping. Sebastian was in the second vehicle, already on his laptop, accessing Pierce Technologies' digital infrastructure and looking for vulnerabilities. "ETA, 42 minutes, the driver announced. Elena nodded. Then she called her daughter. The convoy moved through the Connecticut countryside toward Manhattan like a force of nature, 7 vehicles traveling in perfect formation, headlights cutting through the darkness. Inside the lead SUV, Elena ended the call with Isabella and immediately dialed Margaret Richardson. "I'm sending you a video file. I want divorce papers drawn up within the hour. Grounds for fault based on adultery, emotional abuse, and fraud." "Fraud?" Margaret's voice was crisp, professional. "He made her sign papers under duress in a public setting without legal representation. That document is worthless, but we're going to make sure he knows exactly how expensive his mistake was." "Understood. I'll have everything ready by the time we arrive." The convoy entered Manhattan at 8:43 p.m. The streets were still busy with Friday night traffic, but the vehicles moved with purpose, their presence commanding attention from everyone they passed. They pulled up to Ethan Pierce's building at 8:59 p.m. The doorman, a young man in his 20s who'd been hired to make residents feel important, stepped forward with his professional smile. It died the moment Elena Martinez stepped out of the vehicle. He knew that face. Everyone who followed business news knew that face. Oh, his face right now, priceless. "Mrs. Martinez," his voice actually trembled. "How can I help you?" "I'm here to see my daughter." Behind Elena, 6 more vehicles disgorged their passengers. Diego and Sebastian, 6 lawyers carrying briefcases, 12 security personnel moving with military precision. The doorman's eyes went wide. "I'll need to call up to Mr. Pierce's residence." "No, you won't. You'll provide us with access immediately, or you'll find yourself unemployed before midnight." The doorman looked at the small army assembled in his lobby. He made the smart choice. "Penthouse level, elevator on the right." The elevator ride was silent. Elena stood in the center, her sons flanking her, the legal team behind them, security forming a protective perimeter. "We go in quietly, we collect Isabella, we deliver the legal consequences, and we leave. No theatrics, no violence. We are better than him." The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. The sounds of celebration drifted from the dining room, laughter, clinking glasses, the casual cruelty of people who believed they'd witnessed a victory. Elena walked through the foyer into the dining room like a queen entering enemy territory. Oh my God, can you imagine the silence? The conversation stopped mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to mouths.
Every head turned toward the doorway, and Ethan Pierce's face drained of all color. "Good evening," Elena's voice carried across the silent room with perfect clarity. "I'm Elena Martinez, and I'm here to collect my daughter." "The confrontation you've been waiting for is here. What happens when Ethan discovers who Isabella really is? What does he lose, and how does Isabella finally reclaim her power? Part 5 will bring this story home, and I promise you it's worth the wait."
The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "Isabella," his voice cracked. "What is this?" Elena didn't spare him a glance. Her eyes found her daughter standing near the elevator in the hallway, and the expression on her face softened with something that looked like tenderness and fury combined. Isabella stepped forward into the room, but she wasn't the diminished woman who'd signed papers 10 minutes ago. She stood differently now, shoulders back, head high, like she was remembering something she'd forgotten. Yes, stand tall, honey. Behind Elena, Diego and Sebastian entered the room, both tall, both carrying themselves with the particular confidence of men who'd never needed to prove their power because it was simply understood. Several people at the table gasped in recognition. "Is that Diego Martinez?" someone whispered. "And Sebastian, oh my God." Sophia Blackwell had gone pale beside Ethan. She took a small step backward, distancing herself from him as if proximity might be contagious. Ethan found his voice. "Mrs. Martinez, there's been a misunderstanding. Her name is Isabella Martinez, and the only misunderstanding is yours, Mr. Pierce." Margaret Richardson stepped forward, her presence somehow filling more space than her physical form occupied. She handed Ethan a folder. "Mr. Pierce, inside you'll find documentation that the divorce papers you had Mrs. Martinez sign tonight are null and void. They were signed under duress in a coercive environment, without legal representation present." Ethan opened the folder with shaking hands. "You'll also find evidence of your extramarital affair with Miss Blackwell." Margaret's voice was professionally neutral, but carried an undercurrent of satisfaction, "including photographs, correspondence, hotel receipts, and testimony from 3 witnesses. More than sufficient grounds for Mrs. Martinez to file for an at-fault divorce." Oh, snap, the receipts are real. "This is insane," Ethan's voice rose. "You can't just burst in here and make accusations." "We're not making accusations," Diego's voice was granite. "We're presenting facts. There's a difference." "You should also know," Sebastian added almost conversationally, "that Martinez Digital owns 42% of the cloud infrastructure your platform runs on. As of 1 hour ago, we initiated a comprehensive review of our terms of service agreement with Pierce Technologies." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Without access to that infrastructure, his entire company would collapse within days. "You can't do that," his protest sounded desperate even to his own ears. "Actually, we can. Breach of moral conduct clauses. They're buried in Section 17 of your service agreement. I'm sure you read the fine print when you signed." Ethan hadn't. Nobody ever read Section 17. "Ha ha! Oh, Ethan, you messed with the wrong family." Elena turned to address the 40 guests who'd been frozen in their seats, watching this unfold like spectators at a car crash. "I'm sure many of you are recalculating your professional relationships right now." Her voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly how power worked. "Let me make this simple. Any investor, partner, or associate who remains financially connected to Mr. Pierce after tonight will find themselves unable to access Martinez media platforms for future ventures." The threat was delivered with perfect politeness, which somehow made it more terrifying. The exodus began immediately. chairs scraping back, napkins being dropped on plates, investors suddenly remembering urgent appointments. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I just remembered I have an early morning meeting. This has been lovely, but I really must go. Thank you for dinner." Within 3 minutes, 35 of the 40 guests had gathered their belongings and fled toward the elevator. The remaining 5 were clearly calculating whether their loyalty to Ethan was worth becoming toxic in Elena Martinez's eyes. They chose survival. Within another minute, the room was empty, except for Ethan, Sophia, Isabella, the Martinez family, and the legal team. Bye-bye, fake friends. Sophia grabbed her clutch purse and headed for the door without a word to Ethan. Her heels clicked rapidly across the marble floor. The elevator doors closed behind her. And then there were 2. Ethan stood alone in his dining room, surrounded by the remains of his celebration dinner, facing the family of the woman he'd just discarded. "You're Elena Martinez?" His voice was barely a whisper. "The Elena Martinez?" "I am." "And Isabella she's your daughter?" "She is." Ethan's face cycled through shock, recognition, horror, and the dawning understanding of exactly how catastrophically he'd miscalculated. He turned to Isabella. "You lied to me. For 4 years you lied." Isabella stepped forward. Her voice was steady now, strong, carrying the authority of 4 generations of power she'd tried so hard to escape. "I omitted, there's a difference, and can you honestly blame me?" Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. "You just spent 10 minutes publicly degrading me for being poor, for being unsophisticated, for not having the breeding required to stand beside you." Isabella's voice grew stronger with each word. "What would you have done if you'd known the truth from the beginning?" "I would have," Ethan started. "You would have married me for my money," Isabella cut him off. "You would have used my family's connections to build your empire, and you still would have resented me eventually, because that's who you are, Ethan, someone who can't love anything he can't control." "That's not true." "Isn't it? You spent 3 years trying to erase me, telling me I wasn't sophisticated enough, polished enough, connected enough. You isolated me from my work. You dismissed my art. You made me feel invisible in my own life. Tell him, Isabella, tell him everything." Isabella paused. "And the tragedy is that even if I had told you who I was on day 1, you still wouldn't have truly seen me. You would have just used me differently." "Isabella," Cameron's voice broke, "I gave you 4 years of my life. I loved you with everything I had. I tried to be the woman you needed." Isabella's eyes were dry. No tears, just clarity. "And you thanked me by humiliating me in front of 40 witnesses, by treating me like something disposable, by making me sign divorce papers like I was a problem you needed to solve efficiently. If I had known who you were, if you had known, you would have treated me like a possession instead of a project. Either way, you never saw me, Ethan. You only ever saw what I could do for you." Elena stepped forward and placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. "We're leaving now." Her voice allowed no argument. "Mr. Pierce, you'll be hearing from our attorneys. I suggest you retain competent legal counsel. You're going to need it." She guided Isabella toward the elevator. Diego and Sebastian followed, forming a protective wall between her sister and the man who'd hurt her. At the elevator, Isabella paused. She turned back to look at Ethan one final time. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Her voice held genuine compassion, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just a kind of sad understanding. "But I suspect it doesn't exist, because you've been looking for worth in money and status and power, when the only thing that ever really mattered was whether you could love someone without conditions." The elevator doors closed, and Isabella Martinez left her old life behind. Oh, that's closure. Beautiful, painful closure. The ride down to the lobby was silent.
Isabella stood between her mother and brothers, feeling their presence like a protective barrier between her and everything that just happened. When the doors opened onto the lobby, she stepped out into a space that suddenly felt like the threshold between her past and her future. The 7 vehicles were waiting outside, engines running, ready to carry her home. "Are you all right?" Diego's voice was gruff with barely controlled emotion. "I will be." Isabella looked at her brother. "I think I will be." "I wanted to kill him." Sebastian's hands were clenched into fists. "When Mom showed us what he did to you, I wanted to fly there and end him." Violence wouldn't have helped. Isabella leaned into her brother's protective fury, even as she rejected the impulse. This was better. He'll have to live with knowing exactly what he lost. Elena guided her daughter toward the lead vehicle. "Into the car, darling. We're going home." Isabella climbed into the SUV. The door closed. The convoy began to move, and through the tinted windows, she watched Ethan Pierce's building grow smaller in the distance until it disappeared completely. Inside the vehicle, Elena took her daughter's hand. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." Isabella shook her head. "You gave me exactly what I asked for, the freedom to discover who I was, the space to make my own mistakes." She paused. "I just wish I'd figured it out sooner." "You figured it out exactly when you needed to." Elena squeezed her daughter's hand. "And now we begin the work of helping you remember who you really are." "Aw, Mama's got her baby back." The convoy drove through the city streets, leaving Manhattan behind, heading north toward Connecticut and the estate where Isabella had been born, toward home. By morning, the story had exploded across every news platform. Tech CEO publicly humiliates wife at dinner party, discovers she's billionaire media heiress. The video had leaked. Someone at the dinner had recorded Ethan's speech and sold it to gossip sites. By 6 a.m., it had 17 million views. The business press picked it up by 8. Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, all running variations of the same story. Ethan Pierce's catastrophic miscalculation, the tech darling who publicly discarded his wife only to discover she was worth 50 times his entire company. Ha, oh, the headlines, chef's kiss. The investors who'd fled the penthouse began pulling their money by 9 a.m. Conference calls were happening across the city as boards and partners distanced themselves from the radioactive fallout. The Blackwell family issued a statement by 10. Blackwell Industries severs all business relationships with Pierce Technologies effective immediately. We do not associate with individuals whose character falls below our standards. The irony of that statement, given that their daughter had been the mistress, was apparently lost on them. By noon, Pierce Technologies' valuation had dropped by 60%. By end of business Friday, Ethan Pierce had lost everything it had taken him 5 years to build. And through it all, Isabella Martinez remained silent. She gave no interviews, she made no public statements, she didn't participate in the media frenzy or add fuel to the fire consuming her ex-husband's life. She simply went home. Good for her, let the silence speak volumes. The Connecticut estate looked exactly as she remembered it. The long driveway lined with oak trees, the mansion rising from manicured grounds like something from another era, the ocean visible beyond the gardens, endless and unchanging. Staff lined the entrance when the convoy arrived. Margaret, the head housekeeper who'd known Isabella since childhood, Thomas, the butler who'd taught her to ride a bicycle on these very grounds, Elena, the cook who'd made her favorite meals for 23 years. "Welcome home, Miss Isabella." Thomas's voice was thick with emotion. "It's good to have you back." Isabella hugged him, something she would never have done before she left. "Thank you, Thomas. It's good to be home." Inside the house enveloped her like an embrace. Everything was familiar: the grand staircase, the portrait gallery, the library where she'd spent countless hours as a child. Elena guided her upstairs to her old bedroom. "It's exactly as you left it. I gave instructions that nothing was to be changed." Isabella opened the door and felt tears prick her eyes for the first time that night. Her room was a time capsule. Her paintings still on the walls, her books still on the shelves, her art supplies still organized in the corner where she'd left them 4 years ago. Oh, sweetie, she's finally home. And on her desk, a framed photograph of her father. Rafael Martinez had died 2 years ago, a heart attack that took him without warning. Isabella had learned about it from a newspaper because she deliberately avoided all contact with her family to maintain her experiment in ordinary life. The guilt of that choice washed over her now. "He knew where you were." Elena appeared at her shoulder. "He always knew, and he was proud of you, Isabella, proud of your courage, even when it meant we missed you terribly. I should have come home when he died. He understood why you didn't." Elena's voice was gentle. "He wouldn't have wanted you to sacrifice your journey for his sake. That's who he was." Isabella picked up the photograph. "I never got to say goodbye." "Then say it now. Say whatever you need to say. He'll hear you." Isabella held the photograph and let herself grieve for the first time in 2 years. For the father she'd lost, for the marriage that had destroyed her, for the woman she'd been trying so desperately to become. Elena held her daughter while she cried. No advice, no platitudes, just presence. When the tears finally stopped, Isabella felt emptied and somehow lighter. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you heal. Now you remember who you are. Now you let us help you put the pieces back together." Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away from someone who couldn't see your value? And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life.
It was abuse, Dr. Reeves said during their 3rd session. "I know that word feels strong, but what you experienced fits every clinical definition." "It didn't feel like abuse while it was happening," Isabella admitted. "It just felt like I was failing." "That's how emotional abuse works. It makes you believe you're the problem." Dr. Reeves leaned forward. "It keeps you focused on fixing yourself instead of recognizing that the relationship itself is broken." Exactly. Isabella absorbed this slowly. The understanding that she hadn't failed, that Ethan's treatment of her had been a reflection of his character, not her worth. Her brothers visited constantly. Diego brought her favorite coffee from the city. Sebastian spent hours just sitting with her, not talking, just being present. "I'm sorry we didn't know," Diego said one afternoon. "If we had known what he was doing to you—" "I didn't want you to know," Isabella cut him off gently. "I was too proud to admit I had failed." "You didn't fail," Sebastian's voice was firm. "You loved someone who wasn't capable of loving you back. That's not failure, that's courage." The legal divorce proceedings began within the week. Margaret Richardson was ruthless and precise. The settlement she negotiated made headlines, not because Isabella needed the money, but because it sent a clear message. You cannot humiliate a woman and walk away unscathed. Ethan sent letters, long, rambling apologies that tried to explain and justify and somehow make his choices her fault. Isabella read the first one, then she instructed her lawyers to handle the rest. She had no interest in his regret. She was too busy rebuilding her life. The art came back slowly at first. Isabella couldn't even enter her old studio for the first month. The thought of painting triggered memories of Ethan's dismissive comments, his subtle suggestions that her creativity was a hobby rather than a calling. But one morning, about 6 weeks after coming home, she woke before dawn with the overwhelming urge to create. She went to her studio in her pajamas and pulled out canvases that had been waiting for her, paints that had dried but could be reconstituted, brushes that remembered the shape of her hand. The The first brushstroke was hesitant. The second was bolder. By the time the sun rose, she was lost in the work, her hands moving with a certainty she'd forgotten she possessed. Yes, paint it all out, honey, every emotion. What emerged was dark and powerful, a figure dissolving into shadows while simultaneously reforming into light. Death and rebirth captured on a single canvas. Isabella stepped back and looked at what she'd created, and for the first time in 4 years, she saw herself clearly. She wasn't broken, she was transforming. 6 months after the dinner that destroyed her marriage, Isabella received official notification that the divorce was final. She felt nothing, no sadness, no relief, just a quiet acknowledgement that a chapter of her life had closed. That same week, she received an invitation that would change everything. 18 months after signing those divorce papers, Isabella stood in a Manhattan gallery surrounded by her artwork. The exhibition was called Invisible No More, 23 paintings that chronicled her journey from silence to voice, from erasure to emergence, from invisibility to undeniable presence. The early pieces were dark, shadows consuming a figure until she was almost unrecognizable, the suffocation of disappearing in plain sight. The middle pieces showed chaos, colors clashing, forms dissolving and reforming, the destruction that comes before transformation. And the final pieces were luminous, a woman standing in light, fully herself, no longer hiding or shrinking or apologizing for taking up space. Ah, the transformation is complete! Critics who didn't know her backstory were moved by the universal truth in her work. The Washington Post called it devastatingly honest. Artforum praised her emotional courage. Collectors were already inquiring about purchases before the exhibition even opened. But Isabella hadn't created these paintings for critical acclaim or commercial success. She'd created them to close a chapter. He was dressed casually, jeans and a blazer, holding a glass of wine and looking at her painting with genuine appreciation. "Oh, hello there." "Thank you." Isabella studied his face, trying to place him. "Do we know each other?" "I don't think so." The man extended his hand. "I'm Owen Matthews. I run a foundation that brings art education to underserved communities. And your work, it speaks to something real, something most gallery art is too polished to touch." Isabella shook his hand. "What do you mean?" "This one especially," he gestured to the self-portrait. "It's about standing on the edge of something new, being terrified and exhilarated at the same time, being alone but not lonely." Isabella felt her breath catch. "That's exactly what I was trying to capture." "Then you succeeded." Owen met her eyes, and there was something in his expression that felt like recognition, like meeting someone who spoke the same language. "Would you be interested in coffee sometime? I'd love to discuss a potential partnership between your foundation and mine." It was a professional request, framed as business, but there was something underneath the words that felt like more. Isabella considered the invitation. The cautious part of her, the part that had been so badly burned, wanted to decline, to protect herself, to stay safe in the fortress she'd built. But another part of her, the part that was slowly learning to trust again, recognized something genuine in this stranger's eyes. "I'd like that. Coffee sounds perfect." They exchanged information. Owen lingered for a few more minutes, discussing his foundation's work with obvious passion. He talked about children who'd never been told their creativity mattered, about the transformative power of artistic expression, about his belief that art could change lives if given the chance. Isabella found herself leaning closer, genuinely engaged, genuinely interested. When he finally left to let her return to her other guests, she stood alone with her paintings and felt something she'd almost forgotten was possible. Hope. Hope. The coffee meeting became lunch. Lunch became dinner. Dinner became weeks of careful getting-to-know-you conversations that gradually transformed into something deeper. Owen was nothing like Ethan. Where Ethan had been charming in a calculated way, Owen was genuine without trying. Where Ethan had asked questions to find angles for manipulation, Owen asked because he truly wanted to understand. Where Ethan had made her feel like she needed to shrink, Owen created space for her to expand. He met her family gradually. Diego's protective interrogation, Sebastian's subtle warnings, Elena's careful observation. "I like him," Elena said after Owen left for a family dinner where he'd held his own in discussions about media policy and artistic integrity. "How can you tell?" "Because he disagreed with you about abstract expressionism for 20 minutes and never once backed down just because you're a Martinez." Elena smiled. Only a man secure in himself can argue with a billionaire and not apologize for it. Haha, that's a good man right there. The relationship progressed slowly. Isabella needed it to be slow. She was still healing, still learning to trust, still figuring out how to be in a relationship without losing herself. Owen understood. He never pushed, he never demanded. He simply showed up consistently and reliably, proving through actions rather than words that he was safe. Their first kiss happened 4 months after they met, walking through Central Park after a gallery opening, stars overhead, the city glittering around them. "I've been wanting to do that for a while," Owen admitted afterward, his forehead resting against hers. "Why didn't you?" "Because you needed time, and you're worth waiting for." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever made her feel like her healing was a priority rather than an inconvenience. "I'm falling in love with you. It terrifies me." "I'm falling in love with you too." Owen pulled back to look into her eyes. "And we can be terrified together." Aw, now that's love. Real love. 1 year after her exhibition, Isabella received a phone call she'd been half expecting and half dreading. Ethan wanted to see her. Her first instinct was to refuse, to delete the message and pretend it had never come, to protect herself from whatever pain he might still be capable of inflicting. But Dr. Reeves suggested otherwise. Closure can be healing, but only if you're strong enough to maintain your boundaries. Are you? Isabella thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, standing in that penthouse, signing divorce papers, and she thought about the woman she'd become, the artist, the philanthropist, the woman learning to love again with open eyes. "I think I am." The meeting took place at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, the same neighborhood where Isabella lived as Isabella Torres, the same streets where she'd discovered who she was when no one knew her name. Ethan arrived first. Isabella saw him through the window as she approached, and she almost didn't recognize him.
He looked older, diminished. The confident CEO who'd commanded 40 people's attention was gone, replaced by a man who'd lost everything he thought mattered. "Isabella?" He stood when she entered. "Thank you for coming." She sat across from him, noting the changes, the weight loss, the gray in his hair, the haunted look in his eyes. "You wanted to talk, so talk." Ethan was silent for a long moment, gathering words. "I've lost everything. The company, the investors, the reputation. Sophia left months ago. My mother isn't speaking to me. I have nothing." Isabella waited. "And the worst part," Ethan continued, his voice breaking, "the worst part is that I realize now I had everything when I had you. I had a wife who loved me for who I was, not what I could provide. I had a partner who believed in me when no one else did. I had something real, and I destroyed it because I was too blind to see its value. He gets it now, but it's too late." He looked up at her with eyes that begged for something she couldn't give. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I'm not asking for another chance. I know I burned that bridge beyond repair. I just needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what I lost. I understand what I did to you. And I'm sorry. Genuinely, devastatingly sorry." Isabella studied the man she'd once loved. The man who'd made her believe she wasn't enough. The man who tried to erase her and nearly succeeded. "I believe you're sorry," she said finally, "and maybe someday I'll be able to forgive you, but not today. Today, I'm just grateful that I got out, that I found my way back to myself, that I didn't let what you did to me define the rest of my life. Ethan nodded, accepting the boundary. You deserve every happiness, he said quietly. The man you're with now, Owen, he's lucky to have you. I hope he knows that. He does. Isabella stood, preparing to leave. Goodbye, Ethan. I hope you find peace, but you'll have to find it without me. She walked out of the cafe without looking back. The past was behind her. The future was waiting. And for the first time since that terrible night at the dinner party, Isabella Martinez felt completely free. Freedom. Beautiful, hard-won freedom. 2 years after they met, Owen proposed, not with a public performance, not with calculated drama, just the two of them in her studio, surrounded by her paintings, covered in paint from an afternoon of creating together. I love you, Owen said simply. I love your heart and your courage and the way you see the world. I love that you trust me with your wounds and your dreams. I want to spend my life creating beautiful things with you. Will you marry me? Isabella looked at this man who'd waited for her, who'd given her space to heal, who'd loved her without conditions or calculations. Yes. The wedding happened in the gardens of the Connecticut estate. Small, intimate, just the people who truly mattered. Elena cried, though she would deny it later. Diego and Sebastian stood as proud as if they were giving away their own daughter. And in the front row, an empty chair with a photograph of Rafael Martinez, who'd always believed his daughter would find her way home. Isabella wore a dress she'd designed herself, not cream and forgettable, ivory and bold, with hand-painted details that told the story of her journey. I love you, Owen said simply. I love your heart and your courage and the way you see the world. I love that you trust me with your wounds and your dreams. I want to spend my life creating beautiful things with you. Will you marry me? Isabella looked at this man who'd waited for her, who'd given her space to heal, who'd loved her without conditions or calculations. Yes. The wedding happened in the... Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story of triumph over trials, of love that restores, of justice that doesn't destroy but dignifies. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their worth is never determined by how others see them, that being underestimated is not a curse, it's often a gift that reveals who's truly worthy of walking beside you. And remember, beloved, the people who underestimate you are simply revealing their own limitations. Your value was never up for debate. Until next time, keep rising, keep shining, keep becoming exactly who you were always meant to be. God bless you.